Open Source Software by Rachel Vibert. The topics of my presentation today are: what is open source software, some of the criteria, what are source codes, licenses, closed sources versus open source, some advantages of open source software, and some examples. What is open source software? Open source software is a computer software with its source code made available with a license in which the copyright holder provides the rights to study, change, and distribute the software to anyone and for any purpose. Basically, it is a software code that is made available to the general public so they can change it in whatever way they want for whatever reason they have. It's a software development tool because people use it to enhance or change software. The OSS community generally agrees that open source software should meet some criteria. This generally agreed on criteria is that the program must be freely distributed, which means that anybody who wants this software should be able to get it. Source code must be included with the program, so the program must come with the source code so that the user is able to see it. Anyone must be able to modify the source code, so anybody who has obtained this program should not only be able to see the source code, but be able to change it in whatever way they want. And the modified versions of the source code may be redistributed. So once somebody changes the software by modifying the source code, they are able to redistribute this new software, and it can be for free or for money depending on the license. What is a source code? So a source code is the code computer programmers can manipulate to change how a piece of software works. A software can be like a program or an application, and these manipulations of the code by the programmers can improve the software by adding features to it or fixing parts that aren't working correctly. Licenses. Different licenses allow programmers to modify software with different terms and conditions. Licenses are approved if they comply with the OSI definition of open source software. Copyleft licenses require that all modified and extended versions of the program must be free as well. So if somebody changes the source code of the software in any way, they must, under a copyleft license, they must redistribute their new product free as well. Some examples of license would be the MIT license or the Apache license 2.0. The licenses require that the users must comply with the OSI's definition of open source. And so one of those requirements is the inclusion of what you changed and how. So if somebody manipulated the software in some way, they must include what they changed and the methods that they use to change it. And modifications may or may not be free, again, depending if you have a copyleft license or a different kind of license. Closed source versus open source. So open source software, it is purchased with its source code. So the source code can be seen by the new user. It's typically free of charge. The source code can be modified. It is freely installed into any computer. And an example of an open source would be Firefox. Also, open source software is based on the idea that the user can not only view, but also can change the source code of the existing application. Closed source software, which I will be talking about in my next slide, is hidden to prevent the user either from viewing or changing the code. So closed source software, on the other hand, is purchased without its source code. It usually costs money, and a user must have a license from a vendor before installing it in their computer. And an example of this would be Microsoft Office. What are some advantages to open source software? It is mostly free because open source software is mostly free. It leads to higher quality results because the source code is passed around, tested, and fixed by people across the world. It is considered more secure because, again, people from across the world at all times are looking at these codes and fixing them when they see a problem. So they should be more secure. And finally, they are always available because, once again, people are always managing them. So it is more likely that they will catch a bug or a problem in the code early on. Therefore the program will always be available because a problem will be detected early on. Finally, some examples of open source software are Firefox, OpenOffice, and GIMP. There are many, many open source equivalents to commercial products. Almost every commercial software product available has an open source equivalent. And the sophistication in these equivalent products rival the commercial products. They're just as good. They just happen to be open source, where people from across the world can change the code and enhance it and make it better. These are my sources, and thank you for watching my video on open source software.